Hey everyone, I am back after a couple weeks absence. I apologize to anybody who may or may not have been waiting for content from this channel, but it's actually been tremendously taxing last couple of weeks. I just haven't had any impetus to get on here to make another video. Not to mention a couple things on my plate. I've been helping my other friend build his YouTube channel up, which is actually going to be a more mainstream effort with classic and exotic cars and that whole industry. And so that's been occupying a lot of my time. And I've also been doing a lot of reading to catch up on some other topics to expand on my channel. And as you guys know, my style is kind of go through the texts, and it takes a while to annotate those. And just to give you an idea, I just got a new book today, in fact, called The Controllers, to kind of pick apart the V steganography and the mind control memes a little bit. And I'm gonna pick into some books: The Secret of Cold War Technology, a new book by Joseph P. Farrell, Microcosm and Medium, which I haven't read yet. And I'm going to review some topics from Magnetism and the Living System from Albert Roy Davis and Walter C. Rawls. And suffice to say, that'll be a video that I do that kind of covers some mind control topics that factor into how these memes are administered and how everybody gets kept in the dark. But kind of back to why I've got the Jupiter transit up again. It's getting close to that November 5th date that baked into the V steganography we've got, and from the previous videos with Q, with the numerology of the founding of the country, truly, just to say the least. But I'll be around a lot more often here after this day. It's kind of a demarcation line in my life of sorts. I'll be decoding the Death Stranding stuff and all that as well. But before further investigation into anything else, what I wanted to bring up was the Florida Maquis put a video out today that is pretty incredible. He doesn't even have, well, I guess yesterday is when he was starting to find these in the Florida Everglades, not the Florida Keys, kind of in between the Florida Keys and the Florida Everglades maybe is a better representation. And I'm going to link his video in the description, but the point is he's seeing these platforms, these perfectly square platforms, basically seen through the Everglades, which are incredibly thick, and he doesn't really have an explanation for this, which surprises me a little bit. But if you just looked into the Edgar Cayce readings, there would actually be quite a bit of evidence. If you even we've looked into Frank Joseph's work in the past, of course, but I'm going to get out a passage from this book, which is called Atlantis and Other Lost Worlds, and show you even in here. Here's Edgar Cayce and Frank Joseph. I really do recommend all of Frank Joseph's work on Atlantis because it's very in depth. It comes at it from a bunch of different angles. Most of the time, he references Cayce, and what we know from Cayce's readings is that Cayce was surmising that Atlantis would rise. And there's a whole magazine publication called Atlantis Rising based on this concept. Frank Joseph was a regular contributor to it. And that it was starting in the 60s. And this is a conspiracy that's covered in great detail over on a channel called Dark Journalist, where they actually talk about X steganography rather than V steganography is their specialty. But a whole host of information you can get actually over there with the underwater city of Cuba that Polina Zalitsky found, who was a Russian scuba diver that went down to Cuba, found all of these underwater. This is LiDAR, of course, here, and basically the civilization thought to be Poseidia, the actual city of Poseidia, which was the centerpiece of the Atlantic civilization or culture, and she. With essentially what Gordon Cooper found by flying over Cuba I'll bring up Gordon Cooper's profile here just in case nobody's ever heard of him, who was in the original Mercury program. And where have we heard Mercury before but when we're talking about the Hermetic staff and Hermes and all the symbolism therein with the caduceus and what it represents with Mercury and the substance Mercury, what the Nazis were using to use in their Bell technology to create torsion. All of this stuff is Well, we've gone over it on this channel in the past. So I only bring up Gordon Cooper because he may or may not be somebody that you know about. He's not one of the more famous astronauts out there, but he's synonymous, especially in these esoteric communities, with. And here's an issue of Atlantis Rising, issue 132, where they're talking about Gordon Cooper in the NASA program making maps of the area because this area was of particular interest, what's called the hot zone, over on the Dark Journalists channel, because of the fact that Edgar Casey had predicted that land would start rising. And I think it's hilarious that over here on the Florida Maquis channel, he's got so much down in the Antarctic, but he simply doesn't have an explanation for these platforms that are coming up in the Caribbean. And I think this is just another key example of part of the civilization that we're going to see rising up through the ocean. And I know that I've got a lot of people that have found my work because of his. Earlier on, I was referencing the Earth Grid Network, which we, for review. A lot of you have seen this graphic quite extensively. I've shared it in a lot of my videos. If it'll ever load here, there we go. And he's kind of abandoned focus on the Earth Grid Pentagonal Network, and we're going to pick this back up again on November 8th when that video game Death Stranding comes out, so I can pick apart the mimetic underlayment of what's happening there. But this video is kind of just an update on a couple of those things. To pay attention to November 5th. We're going to talk a little bit more about the V steganography as things go along. But there's another thing that's really interesting that played on a podcast. Hold on.
Altar and summoning the demon. There's a reason for that.
Hold on, guys. It's still my computer's not doing a good job of processing here. I gotta find it. It's about the 12-minute mark here. This is the Higher Side chats, and Greg Carlwood is the guy who does this podcast, and he had Eric Dollard on the other day. It was October 19th. So this is after I did my last video, and I'm going to play it starting at around the 11-minute mark and talk about this a little bit because it goes directly into what we're talking about. And if for people who don't know who Eric Dollard is, he's of the same lineage of Michael Faraday and Oliver Heaviside and James Clerk Maxwell and all of these people that have they were the gods of electric engineering. Nikola Tesla, of course, my favorite of them all, the father of all of it. And Eric P. Dollard he understands the science. He's probably the foremost expert that's still alive that carries forth the knowledge. So just to give you a little bit of an understanding, this is a wonderful podcast to listen to, but listen to what he's saying here at the 12-minute mark. Or just a sec here, I gotta hit play. I don't know what's going on with me today. Here we go.
This causes a massive parasitic current inside the Earth, which is completely wiping out my telluric research. In one location where a lot of effort, time, and money was spent in putting up the receiving system, once we connected to the Earth, we found that the parasitic zero sequence or harmonic component traveling inside the Earth was 20 million times stronger than the signal we wanted to receive.
Did you guys hear that? He's specifically talking, I guess it's at the 11-minute and 30-second mark into the podcast. Eric's talking about an electromagnetic parasite network that's disrupting his research. And I kid you not, guys, I just started busting up laughing when this came on because it's exactly what we're talking about. The Earth Grid Network, this network, is being hijacked with both memes and with physical technology. And that's why, again, I think it's going to be really incumbent on me to do a video that goes through and talks about all of these concepts and ties them together and culminates in, the controllers. A really short book. I thought it was going to be a little bit longer when I got it, but once I go through that, we'll go a little bit deeper in, and we'll probably couple it with the Death Stranding stuff. But it's too good not to share. Remember, the Earth is expanding, everyone, along these Earth joints on the buckyball, and Atlantis Rising is just one of those things. So let me see if Eric says a couple other key things here.
You could actually connect a telephone receiver between a 1,200-foot span, connecting to a set of 8-foot ground rods on each end, and you hook a telephone handset, something that most people probably don't even know what it is anymore, and it's so loud you couldn't hold it to your ear.
Wow, wow. And you mentioned the Babylonian element. Last time we talked, you had mentioned a sort of neo-pagan cult that was somewhat interfering in your work as much as you could surmise. Is that what you're talking about? Some kind of philosophical difference in how to manage energy and electricity that is derived from some cult-like beliefs?
Well, that's another element. And that's kind of more, you know, like on a spiritual level.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the nefarious activities of that element have become kind of quite public lately because they're very deviant people.
I'm just going to leave it right there, guys. This goes into it's too spooky with all of the temple grid network we've talked about. He's talked about the same controllers that have done this stuff for centuries, and now we're seeing, because we understand the ways in which they're administering these control grids. We get it. We don't yet know how to necessarily break free of the agenda, but go listen to this podcast by Eric Dollard. I'm gonna link this in the description too, but. Here's the real reason I wanted to get the video going today, guys. As I bring up my images again, as these things are not loading very well today, computers must be bogged down. There we go. My goal is always, again, to activate the heart center chakra, the Christ consciousness, blast through the BS of the Old Testament, and uncover what's really being said about it. And one of the key things we've got at our disposal in decoding all of this, one of the major components is the entirety of the Greek philosophy around metaphysics, and and kind of the missing link that they are between the ancient world of Atlantis and kind of what Jesus was telling us when he was here to go back and look into. And I've talked about the pentagram several times, how it's been flipped upside down by the Satanists. And phi is the golden ratio here. I'm going to bring up some other Greek characters, though. Phi isn't the only one that we've discussed, and Omega, in fact, is one that we're going to show right here in terms of the solar flaring. Each one of these Greek characters, let me back up a second while I describe it. I'm going to go through a couple of these. They represent not only visual symbols of what they measure, but they're metaphysical. They're just metaphysical symbols. I won't go any more into it than that, and you'll see why they represent it. So here's Omega. We've all seen this, but what a lot of people don't know is the function of Omega has a few different things. You can measure angular velocity of a flare, of the solar flare in a sun, and it just so happens that it matches the arc of a solar flare. The electric capacitance and electrical resistance, inside of a light bulb is measured using this character. And just like the golden ratio of phi here with these lengths, I'll show in a second, it has some other connotation. But here's we'll zoom in on this, a classic example of a solar flare, Omega, a representation of it. How did the Greeks know? They didn't have telescopes apparently with any of this. So how did they know that the shapes of the prominence of the arc were going to be able to not only have a character of being able to measure it, but also be able to have it put into their alphabet in their mathematics. Phi is what we were talking about with the ratio, and we talked about in the last video, of course, when you put phi on its side, what you end up getting is this magnetic flux representation. Visually speaking, this is what it's measuring. And it's just the pressure mediation between the magnetism of the two polarities. Over here you've got psi, and this is a really easy. Quite simply, this is the midpoint of two waveform functions to find the measurement of the crest or the trough. And what does it look like? A line that split it right down the middle. How not using microscopes or electron microscopes or anything did the Greeks understand functionally what the metaphysical realm was all about? Theta, of course, we've got here, and we show the spherical representation of the polarities. This is just the double toroid, basically, that we'll get more into when I describe magnetism and its living systems in this book. Anyway, just some good food for thought, guys. I hadn't shown up for a while, and I really wanted to get a video out real briefly to say hi to everybody. I changed the name of the channel My friend, in fact, who I'm working on this other car channel with, recommended the Skull Cap Savant because he's actually he's called me that for a while, and I think it's a good better name for the channel than Silver Energy 369, which is basically just a glorified gamer tag essentially. But be careful of all of the anonymous agenda items out there, guys. Bring darkness into light, and if you like the research, let me know, and let me know if there are any topics you want me to look further into, and I might consider that too. But it's good seeing everybody. Talk to you soon.